Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wine, Women, and Words. I did it again. I am Michelle, and with me, of course, is Diana.
Hello.
And this evening, we are joined by Leah Franqui, who is the author of America for Beginners. And if you guys are on Instagram, you will have seen pictures of this cover just popping up everywhere in the Bookstagram universe.
Yes, I know I took a couple photos of it on my personal Instagram, and we'll be sharing some of those on our Wine, Women, and Words Instagram because it's just such a great photographable, is that a word? Photographable book. Yeah, photogenic. There we go. Thank you. We're not writers or anything.
We know words.
Yeah, it's a really photogenic book. Like I had to get a photo of it with my dad's Corvette. So.
Is it red?
No, it is not red. It is blue. But you know, there's the red and the flag, so it totally matches.
Oh, it matches. It matches.
Yeah, it totally matches. Yeah. And thank you, Dad, for having a Corvette.
Oh, I appreciate that.
so thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
So we're changing it up a little bit. We are at the beginning of the month, but Leah is actually going to be joining us for the full hour because, full disclaimer, Diana and I have been super swamped this past week, and I've read like 5 pages. Like, yeah, I'm taking a statistics class, and it's murdering me, like, slowly, and it's enjoying my slow, agonizing death. And it dominated my life right now. It's awful. I mean, if my professor happens to hear this, I love it, and I'm learning so much.
And my excuse was I didn't really realize that it was August and that it was going to be August until yesterday on the 1st. So I did not plan appropriately.
Such things happen.
Yeah, exactly. But I will be getting into it this weekend. Because it's going to be a great poolside read. I love paperbacks for that reason, because I can totally like destroy them in the pool while I'm reading and swimming.
It does. It's like I think it's a perfect book, beach read. And we're driving down to the Outer Banks next week. We're going to be beachside for a full week, and I'm like so excited to take this down to the beach with me. Because with 2 toddlers, I'm obviously going to have so much time to read, but I'll make it work.
But since we're not talking about that tonight, we are going to be spending an hour on America for Beginners. And I am so excited to be able to talk about this book. If you guys haven't already guessed with my fangirling at the moment. Because I really did love this book.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So before we get into that, I think we need to do a round robin of what everybody's drinking. Guests first?
Sure. I'm drinking a Vinho Verde Rosé from Portugal, and it is excellent.
That sounds bomb.
Ooh,
very refreshing.
Okay.
I've never had Portugal wines. Are they good?
They are great.
Ooh.
Oh, yes. Portugal is great.
I'll have to check it out. I'm used to the Spanish wines. Spain gets a lot of credit for their wines. Italy, obviously. But you don't hear too much about the Portuguese wines.
They are great. They are, you know what? Keep it a secret, because let's drive the price down.
Oops, okay, yeah. Insider info, guys.
Don't tell anyone.
Yes. And Michelle, how about you?
Okay, so I'm not drinking wine tonight because I have to finish my statistics paper after this. I worked on this for 4 hours all day. Not all day, but I worked on it for 4 hours after I got home from the gym, and I thought, I got this. I could finish this before tonight, and I couldn't. And I still have to, like, I did all the Excel stuff, and now I have to write a full-page paper proposing the stories that I would write using the data that I found and the answers previous. So I need to be clear-headed. So I'm sorry. I'll drink one when I'm done.
Yeah, I will.
To celebrate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I am drinking a white wine blend. I haven't tried white wine blends before. And this one's really good. It's very citrusy. It's a Koya, and it's one of our Winc wines. So yes, and they have so many great wines, and I love the fact that as you rate them, their selection gets better and better. And I love all the wines that they've been sending me. So, and it's all tailored to my palate and what I like.
That's awesome.
Yeah, isn't it? It's great. It's a great club. I love it. If you guys want to check it out and join us with the wine and see what it's all about, go to trywinc.com/www podcast, and you can get $22 off your first order. So that's totally a great deal.
One thing I did see that I'm already going to pick out for my next month's box, if I can, I got an email from Winc. They have a scratch and sniff wine label.
Oh my God, yeah, I saw that.
I saw the email pop up and it said, finally, a scratch and sniff wine. I'm like, oh my God. Like, I'm going to be that person who's like scratching and like just sniffing a wine bottle.
Your bottle up to your nose, yeah.
It's your bottle. You can do whatever you want with it.
Right?
Exactly. I love how innovative they are. They have this freedom to be innovative with their wines, and I love being their guinea pigs.
Oh yeah.
Right. I'll take it. I'll scratch it. I'll sniff it. I'm not ashamed.
Maybe it adds to the bouquet.
Exactly. Look at us using fancy wine words. Bouquet.
Wow. We're going to be all sophisticated tonight.
Fancy podcast.
So Diana has been. I am reading it. I did not finish it. But Diana has been raving about this book since she picked it up. I don't know, sometime last month.
Mid-July. Early July.
Yeah, last month was July.
Oh, it's July for me. It doesn't.
Like you said, you don't even know it's August. You don't know.
It's only August 2nd, so it wasn't really fully a true month ago.
She read City of Brass in like a day and a half, so she had plenty of time to read something else before the end of the month.
Yeah.
Good story.
I'm just jealous, okay? I'm jealous of all the books you get to read.
I'm rich. Yeah, so I love this book, and as I think I might have said that so far this podcast, that I love the book. I might have.
I think you said it, yeah.
Yeah, I might have, yeah. So, Leah, I'll let you give the brief synopsis of what the book's about.
Sure, absolutely. So America for Beginners is about a Bengali widow who takes a tour of the United States, ostensibly to travel outside of India for the first time in her life, but really because she's trying to figure out what happened to her son, who moved to the United States years ago and never returned, and was kind of excommunicated by her husband when he came out to them. She's joined on her trip by a companion who she's hired for modesty, who's a young American actress struggling to make it in New York. And she's guided in her trip by a young tour guide on his first tour of the United States. She hired a company that markets itself as Bengali. They're actually Bangladeshi. And that's not the last surprise, pleasant or unpleasant, that she encounters across her trip.
So what inspired the story?
Oh, well, there are many things that inspired this story. So one of the things that I should say is I'm having this call with you from Brooklyn, but I live in Mumbai. I moved there 3 years ago with my husband, who is originally from Calcutta. And I met my husband in graduate school, and when we were about to graduate, my now in-laws and my now sister-in-law came for a trip, and it was I think that my mother-in-law had been outside of India once, and I don't know that my father-in-law or sister-in-law had been outside of it at all, or maybe once, to sort of nearby locations. My soon-to-be new family were not super well-traveled necessarily outside of India, and they decided to do a tour. This is one of these things that people do, and they wanted to do it too. Everybody said it was great. This is how you got to see America. So they decided to do a tour. And my husband was like, please don't do this. This is a terrible idea. You're going to regret it. It's awful. But they did it. And then he realized he kind of had to go with them because no matter how their English is, which is great. If you haven't traveled, there's a lot of things that are confusing about travel, even if you are well traveled. There's certainly a lot of things that are confusing about travel if you haven't traveled very much. And you got to realize they would really struggle with this if they were sort of sent out into the United States alone. And so he did this tour with them. And it really it exposed me to the fact that there's a whole world of tours that are marketed to people of certain countries. So there are tours that are marketed specifically to Indians. Because there's like a growing number of Indians who travel outside of India. There's a lot more disposable income now than there was 30 years ago. And people want to go on these tours that are organized by Indian tour companies. And I thought this was really crazy. You go on a tour organized by someone from your country, not someone from the country you're visiting. And like more than organized, like guided by someone from your country. Because I wouldn't really trust an American to, I don't know, show me Turkey. I don't want a Turkish person. It would just seem so odd to me. And the trip they took was so crazy. And it was some of the stuff on it was stuff I've never seen and would never see in the United States. Well, not never, but just not a ton of interest. And it really inspired. It became the locus point of this story.
Yeah, and I love that road trip feel about it. And you brought up such a great point because I mean I've traveled to other countries, and yeah, I want my guide to be from from that country. And the thing that even though this is a road trip book, it feels there's so much of a culture, explores culture and culture clashing and culture shock. Really, I mean, you've got the mother who's coming to the U.S. for the first time, so there's that culture shock. And I have to say, what was I can't remember the actress's name again. It was Rebecca. I want to say Rebecca. For some reason, I keep wanting to say Rachel, but it's totally Rebecca. I loved her, and I loved how she was still so free. Where she's having dinner with the mom, whose last name I'm thinking, Paval, right? Yeah. She's having, dinner with Paval, and she's drinking wine in front of her, and she's like, "Oh, well, you're not going to drink. Well, here, I'm just going to have more for myself." And I love that. So you have that culture clash between them, and then the culture clash between Bengali versus Bangladesh. How did that come into play for you? Because as you mentioned, you're living in Mumbai now. So how are you able to learn about that to be able to write that as you did?
Well, actually, when I wrote this book, I certainly for the first couple drafts of this book, I was still living in the United States. So I was even more removed from India. And I already knew that I was going to be moving to India when I started writing this novel. It was something that my husband and I, it was part of my willingness to do that and to sort of move our relationship forward by doing that was part of what sort of solidified, our future together, because it was sort of like, okay, we'll work with each other and be this like bicultural couple and bi-country couple. And I knew that so I already knew I was going to move to India, and I already knew that I had this Indian, I married into this Indian family who I was very fascinated by. So I was doing a lot of like personal research. And one of the things that makes my husband really angry is that a lot of Indian businesses that call themselves Indian businesses, specifically in New York, I actually don't know about other cities, but here in New York, where we were living before we moved to Mumbai, a lot of Indian businesses are run by Bangladeshis, especially restaurants. And my husband would get really, really angry because we'd go and there's a lot of layers of food translation there, both very into food. Go to a restaurant and you're getting Bangladeshis cooking a kind of approximation of North Indian food that's been translated already to the American palate. Mm-hmm. Already getting 3 layers, and he just would be so angry about that. And we really so my husband is from Bengal, but he's actually ethnically North Indian. He's Punjabi, but he grew up in Bengal. He grew up in Calcutta, and so Bengali culture was something he knew really well because he grew up in it. And he speaks Bengali, and he likes Bengali food. And he was like, I don't know why you don't just cook Bangladeshi food. Like, Bangladeshi food's really good. It's similar to West Bengali food. It's like East Bengal is what Bangladesh is. And he would be very irritated by this. And the Bangladeshi waiters who he would irately scold in Bengali, be very confused. And they'd be like, listen, like nobody knows what Bengali is. Like, I mean, they don't know what that is. Like, this is what people want to buy. This is what people want to eat. People want to go out to dinner and have chicken tikka masala because that's what they know Indian food to be. Like, that's what we're going to make money. And so I think a lot of that really informed those choices I made about like people's ethnic backgrounds. And also because the more I learned about Bangladesh, the more disturbed I was that I didn't know more about Bangladesh. I found that, I mean, in 1971, 10 million people were displaced by the invasion of what is now Bangladesh by Pakistan. And like, I didn't know anything about that. And I felt kind of terrible about myself for not knowing anything about that. So I think there was that too, that element of like, the more I learned, the more I wanted to keep learning. And I wove that into this story.
Mm-hmm. And I love it because it gave so much of a depth, because here, even in California, we have a very large Indian population in LA and Orange County. And I can honestly say I'm really ignorant of the Americanized culture. I have a friend who's Indian, and I know of, the Americanized version. Because to me, it was like, okay, it's like Chinese food, where you go to a Chinese restaurant, I just assume that an average American is going to assume there's no difference between a Cantonese meal and a Mandarin-based meal. And to understand that there's different intricacies between the different regions of India, we don't really realize that. And we don't know these politics. And we're I have found in recent years that in our history classes and in our news, we're so very narrow-minded on what we get in our news. At least international news. I mean, obviously American stuff, but like even in our history classes, our world history is based on Western history and Europe, and so we don't learn in depth about India. We know about Gandhi, and that's pretty much all we're talking about.
Yeah. I definitely got like, I when I was in history class, I learned like British colonialism, Sepoy Rebellion, which is like 1857, end of East India Company, beginning of British rule, Quit India movement, which is, partition struggle, Gandhi, Muslim League, and the way that we're taught it, it's like, and then India became its own country and everything was great.
Yeah.
But also became a country and that's cool. Like, I mean, like, that's it, right? Like, partition is this event that is, partition is an event that has like scarred India the way that World War II has scarred the West. And I used to be really surprised when like people, like when my husband or when Indians I met didn't like know that much about World War II, because I'm Jewish and like it's a big deal. And then my husband, who's very patient, was like, well, we had something else going on. You were like, oh yeah, like, oh crap. You had your own thing going on. Of course you don't know about this. Wow.
When was partition going on? What years was it going on?
47.
Oh, okay.
So literally something else going on at the exact same time.
Well, and of course, like partition was preceded by 20 years of like freedom struggle, right? Like everything that's happening with Gandhi is happening from the 1930s on, and there's a lot of division within the independence movement, and there's the Muslim League, which is trying to establish a separate Muslim state. My grandfather actually traveled through India in like 1943 because he was a soldier in the American Army, and he was stationed in what is now Iran. They were running supply lines up to Russia. Iran was controlled by the British, and so it was like there were American soldiers throughout the Middle East running these supply lines to like, fund ally or to like support allies in these battles in Russia. And he traveled through India, and he was like traveling on the trains, and he met a lot of soldiers who were all Indian because like Indians were part of the British Army. And they were all talking about Gandhi, and he felt my grandfather's like, very liberal. He cried when President Obama was elected the first time, and he was really depressed. Like he's always remembered this as like they were talking about Gandhi, and he didn't know who Gandhi was, and he just felt so guilty. Like there was this thing happening in this part of the world that he didn't know anything about. And I'm always like, you should let yourself off the hook. It wasn't like making. I mean, there was something else going on in Europe too. Like anyway, but yeah, there was something else going on that we just don't learn anything about, and I didn't learn anything about. I don't think I would know any of the stuff that I know if I hadn't gotten together with somebody Indian.
And this is one of the reasons why I love literature, and I love mostly I read a lot of historical fiction, and even though it isn't historical fiction, you get into some of the history of India just a touch. You touch on it a little bit, and it's a way to learn about these other cultures that I would never have learned about before, and that's one of the things I absolutely love.
That's what I love about reading. I mean, like I love being taken somewhere else. I love the opportunity to learn more about the world.
Mm-hmm. And so much a book for outsiders. Like, it's funny, when I went and checked out some of the reviews on Goodreads, I think the funniest reviews were like, this really wasn't much of a road trip book.
Yes.
There's just like, you're missing the point of the book. Just about
but it has a car on the cover.
Well, look too, there's a little bit of like marketing that, right? Like, I mean, it's not like I go around being like, this is a road trip novel. Like there's a road trip, but there's a trip in this novel. I think road trip too implies that they're like in a car the whole time. They're like usually in buses. So like, I don't even, but I like it. I like
around too. And the road trip is just the MacGuffin to help move the plot forward.
It's a tour novel, and I just think there's no tour genre, so they're like putting it in like when there's enough tour books that it's like a tour genre, then people will finally be happy with it.
Yeah, tour genre. We're going to carry this around with us as we take trips through the U.S. We'll start off in New York based on this.
Yeah.
And go to New Orleans, and I'm surprised that they were able to find, they found an Indian restaurant in New Orleans.
Oh, you can find an Indian restaurant anywhere in this country. No, because these trips actually do guarantee 11 Indian dinners. The secondary reason my husband was like, I have to go on this trip with my parents, was because that trip guaranteed 11 Indian dinners. And he was like, my parents aren't coming to the United States to eat terrible Indian food. I just, I mean, like they do, like they guarantee it in DC and Niagara, Las Vegas. They will find you Indian food.
I mean, Vegas I could believe.
Yeah.
But I mean,
the Grand Canyon.
And I used to be a travel agent for a couple of years, and what you said about your husband not wanting his parents to go have awful Indian food because they know what the real food should taste like. It's just kind of a reflection of how our palates in America regarding cultural food can be a little different, a little off target, because I had this woman, one of my coworkers booked her on this trip to Italy. And so she went to Italy and came back, and they called to see how she enjoyed her trip. And she goes, it was great, but the food was terrible.
What?
And everyone, like the whole aisle, you could see like the heads stick out of the cubicles, because you could hear, our coworker go, the food was bad. How could the food be bad? And she goes, there wasn't a single Olive Garden in the entire country.
That's beautiful.
And it's just like,
you're
missing the point.
Oh, God.
It's funny. My Italian family will not be caught dead in an Olive Garden. I will go there for their salad and breadsticks. They make some good salad and breadsticks, but
stuff is what it is, right? Like,
yeah.
Look, I'm not going to say I've never been to an Olive Garden. I have Jewish grandparents who like a bargain. We went to an Olive Garden. But I would say, things are like there is, look, you have to sort of acknowledge that this is like the facsimile and not the thing.
Right. Yeah.
In the same way that like you were talking about Chinese food earlier. And I like American Chinese food. We grow up with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we know what it is, but more and more, especially those of us in cities with large populations. And I think the three of us are all, from
Yeah.
population. We have so much more variety in Chinese food than we ever have before. We have Szechuan and Xi'an and, Cantonese and Hongkonese and Taiwanese and Chinese street food and Chinese sort of formal food. And we're just getting so much more variety than we did like 15 years ago, 10 years ago. And so there's still a place in my heart for like American Chinese food. Like there's a place in my heart for an Olive Garden salad and salad and breadsticks. But it's like it does that become the end all and be all about what your palate thinks the cuisine is. And you look, by the way, everybody does this. Like I live in India now, and the Chinese food that you get in India is Indian Chinese food. So, people eat stuff like a popular Chinese dish is paneer in chili sauce.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're not going to find that in China, right? But it's like that's what Chinese food is in India. There's a lot of dishes that are like their own kind of thing, and for Indians, especially those who go to China, go abroad, learn the world of Chinese food. They love all that other Chinese food if they love it, but they still love Indian Chinese food because it's like it's a thing. It's its own thing, and you've got to sort of let these things be their own thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also speaking to us as travelers, because as much as we want to get out and see other cultures, we still want that anchor of what we know. Though, unless you're my husband, his thing that he loves to do is whenever we travel to another country, he asks the guide or a local that we've gotten to know and talk to, take me to where the locals eat. That's like his big thing. And he had a blast in Peru. He actually tried guinea pig in Peru just because that's what they all eat. Yeah. Yeah. I think the only time we had a problem with not finding what the locals eat was when we were in Costa Rica. And Costa Rica is now very Americanized with their food. And we went to one restaurant that was really, really good, but it tasted like it was very similar to Mexican food that we got here in the States. And so we're just kind of like, oh, okay. And they were like, what? You want stuff you can't get in America? We what?
But we have all this.
We made this for you.
Exactly. We were in an all-inclusive resort, basically.
Yeah. I think we all do. I mean, I actually never crave I'm not a big fast food person, and I'm not a particularly huge fan of Starbucks, but there is something, especially living abroad, there are these things that you go for that you just, sometimes you just want to be in a place that feels like you could be anywhere.
Yeah, and usually when I travel, when I come home, I just want a burger.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't eat burgers a lot here at home, but it's like when I come home, there's just something where I'm like, I just really want a burger. That's usually my first meal when I'm at home.
Certainly when I come back from India, I want a burger because I live in a state that has banned the sale of beef.
Oh.
So, yeah, can't get that.
That's interesting. So how is it like for you going from America to Mumbai? That's got to be, was there a big culture shock for you for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, there's a lot of things that have sort of layered into that experience for me. And it's sort of interesting to think now I've lived in Mumbai for 3 years. And I think that the way that I've felt about it has changed every year as I've adjusted in a different way. I did have a lot of prep time. Like I knew I was going for a full year. We were living in Brooklyn for an additional year after after my husband and I both graduated from graduate school. So we met. And I kind of had a lot of prep time, which was good and bad. And I had never been to India before I moved there. I should say that. That's important. Wow. And in some ways, I'm glad because I think being okay, you've just got to adapt. You can't back out. That's good because moving to a developing country, especially India, which is every country has its unique things. Moving to a developing country is really moving to India is giving up infrastructure. And that's really in and of itself, that's sort of baffling and difficult and frustrating. But there's also just a huge cultural difference. And I think that even if we'd moved to say South America, there would be a little bit more of a cultural affinity. But I think that moving to the East, which has totally different, the zeitgeist is totally different. The foundational literature is different, right? Like speaking as people who love books, right? So like our stories and what we plug into are these are all like the things that root from like our baseline texts, like the Greek epics, like the Western Bible, like a couple things that just really make up like our foundational stories and like what it means to be a person and like what love means, what family means, and the foundational text, the foundational religious thoughts, the foundational sort of like how cultures and societies are built, they're just totally different in India. And that's a great thing. You rarely go any place anymore that isn't like that isn't super influenced by Hollywood. You know, like there's so much, like American influence is so deep, and we're such like cultural colonialists, and we sell our culture to the world, and it's like, you know, it's so well loved and so well known. And India creates so much of its own content. It creates more movies than the United States every year. It has so many languages. It has so much of its own content that it's not consuming so much outside content. It's consuming itself. And so it's more of a bubble in terms of like reference point and story. And the way that affects daily life is like, it's just, you're learning, you're in such a deep dive of foreignness all the time. There's like the beginning, it's a lot of like, how do I hold on to this? There's so many layers of things to learn. There's so many festivals. There's so many religious, like expressions of religious life. There's so many cultural changes around how you get around and what is socially acceptable and what modesty means, and like how women are sort of mobile and non-mobile, and how you treat other people, and the labor issue. Like there's so much labor because there's so many people. So everybody has domestic help, and that's like kind of a tough thing to get your head around. So there were all of these ways to adapt. You know, like there were so many levels on which it was difficult to adapt. But generally, I think it's fascinating. It's really good to go someplace that challenges your idea of the world. We all have this sense of like, I know what the world is. Like I know how things are done. And I think that the thing that is like a good character building is that living abroad anywhere means that you have to get used to being wrong a lot. You don't know how things are done. You don't do things correctly. You know, things don't work the way you think they should or do. And you're often, you know, I think few people I know are like deliberately offensive, myself included, but like you're often like learning ways to communicate, ways to be respectful, ways to make yourself happy that are different. And I'm glad I had a partner in it. Like I'm glad I was there with my husband. I'm still there with my husband. And I'm happy. I think it's been great for my writing. I think it's been great for my sense of empathy and even my sense of kindness to myself. But I think it's really challenging, and I'm lucky to live in a city that is really the best city in India for women and the best city in India for foreigners. It's the most cosmopolitan. There's the most infrastructure in Mumbai than any city in India. There's the most international presence. And those are all good things for me. But this guy's very cute. He also wants to be. But yeah, it's in a word, challenging. Sorry, that's a long response. I don't have
no, that's great.
I don't have an easy response to this. And if I lived in Italy, it would be like, it's delightful and charming. You know, like I wish I had an elevator pitch thing for like, what's it like to live in India? But I always want to be as honest as possible. And it's like such a complicated response.
In so many ways, India feels very foreign to, I think for me, from the US stance, because just of, it's not as westernized as so many other countries are. I mean, even China to an extent has become westernized.
I think China at least looks to the West, like China looks to the West a lot in a way that India really doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I was a kid, I moved to Switzerland with my parents. My dad was Swiss, and we all moved back there. And that's Western Europe, and it's very westernized. But even that, like going to school in a foreign country and going to school in a foreign language, it took about a year, I think. Or it took about 3 months for my mom and I to stop calling our friends in California every night, crying, saying we wanted to come home. And it took about a year to adjust. And that was, a Western European country that had everything that I was used to. I mean, I remember legitimately, seriously asking my dad 2 questions. And keep in mind, I was 11 or 12 at the time. Okay. So question number 1, do I have to wear lederhosen?
That is a valid question.
That was a legit question in my mind because, you know, that's all you see. And question number 2, do they have like everything that we have? Like, you know, like running water and electricity? I didn't know.
How would you know?
But, you know, I was at the time, you know, I lived in my bubble. And that was a huge adjustment for me. I couldn't imagine taking myself so far out of my comfort zone and inserting myself in a world that was so different from mine.
Yeah. It is really hard. It's also, honestly, it's hard to move as an adult. Like, if we had moved to another American city, that would be hard. You know, like, all layers of it, all levels of it are hard because there aren't all the structures for making friends that you have when you move as a college student or graduate student, or, you know, a little easier in your earlier 20s or your mid 20s, or, you know, any time before you sort of gel as an adult. And then there's also, there's the stuff of like actually moving to a place that I can honestly say doesn't have all the things we have in America. You know, like really, really doesn't have it. Although, again, I mean, Mumbai is really great. I mean, it's a super cosmopolitan city. It really does have almost everything. I mean, it is just like there's incredible high luxury, there's incredible poverty, but it is a very like fast-paced and cosmopolitan city. So it isn't the idea of India that some people I think have, that I like live in some like mud hut in a village. You know? Although that obviously, like, that does exist, that experience is out there, but that's not mine. I live in an apartment building.
So within the book itself, in so many ways, the characters, they have this perspective of, they feel like outsiders, and like Rebecca is an outsider within her own country in some regards, and then, you know, the other characters are outsiders very much in, you know, that surface sense that they're not from here. One's an immigrant, one's just visiting. Did your experiences living in Mumbai play into being able to create that feeling and that tension within the story?
I think not, actually, because that fish out of water effect was something that I was really interested in. But I, when I wrote the novel, I hadn't moved to Mumbai yet.
Oh, that's right. Yes, you mentioned that. I forgot.
No, it's fine, actually. Because I think the whole, like, for me, actually, I think that the character that I entered this story through personally the most are characters like Jake and Rebecca. Because I think, you know, a lot of this novel is about, I mean, you know, in terms of like, when you get together with somebody from another country and you marry into a family that comes from this other place, you do see the world through their eyes. Like, I did start seeing the United States through my husband's eyes, through my mother-in-law's eyes. She came to visit several times. And as Indians do, she stayed with us for a very long period of time. It's not, I mean, it was like a month each time, which is a very long period of time to me. And
especially when it's an in-law.
That's a thing. Like, she stayed with us. We got married. We wanted to move in together earlier. We had a lot of apartment snafus here in Brooklyn, and we ended up moving in together 5 days before we got married. Or no, 7 days before we got married. And on the 6th day after we moved in together, my mother-in-law came and stayed with us for a month.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah. And I had only met her once before. And that was like her 3rd time abroad, 2nd time in the United States, stayed with us. I literally had just moved in with my husband. We never lived together before, and it was like a lot of stuff at once. And I think watching her adjust to America, diving into my husband's experience, I definitely met a lot more Indians through him, and the way that it was just such a different, it was an insight into like modern movement and immigration from their sort of part of the world. And all of my experiences with immigration had been my grandparents. My father's parents moved from Puerto Rico in, I guess, 49. And so they were like migrants, right? Because Puerto Rico is a commonwealth and was then. And my grandmother came from Iran by way I mean, she came from Russia by way of Iran. And so they were, and my grandfather's grandparents came from Poland. So they were all part of like that farther back idea. That's very much like was my immigrant narrative, like what I understood immigration to be. And meeting these newer people and seeing them adjust, it was a totally new way to think about adjustment. And my husband had also moved. He was coming from Singapore, so he'd been in Singapore for almost 9 years. So he transplanted a couple times. He had a couple layers of like transplanting and refitting, and like he actually had like a greater sort of global perspective than I did, even though I'd sort of like traveled a lot and maybe traveled to even more countries. He'd lived abroad a lot, and that had given him a wider look at the world. And I think that I absorbed, like, all of that was where this novel came from. Because I was the one who was seeing my country in a new way. Right?
And that's such a powerful thing.
Sorry?
That's such a powerful thing, to be able to see your country in a new way through other people's eyes.
Yeah.
Not many of us get to do that.
No, exactly. I mean, and now I'm the fish out of water. Now I'm the one who's doing, you know, that other part of it in India. But I think at the time when I wrote it, I was sort of like, I was knocked out of my complacencies by their experience. And now in India, I'm knocked out of my complacencies by my own experience.
So you're totally on like unsteady ground wherever you go. It's such a great place.
It's a fruitful place. It's not always a restful place, but it's a fruitful place.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, one thing I do want to touch on is the LGBT theme within this, because I think that the journey is so heavy, you know, so heavy in this book, both for personal reasons within the characters and the physical journey. But you also have this theme of LGBT, of acceptance, and that cultural acceptance. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Do you want me to talk about like sort of the way that LGBTQ sort of is in India, or the way that works in the novel, or
both?
Okay,
both work for me.
Cool. Well, I think in the novel, you know, in a lot of ways, this novel, like Paval's trip, is sort of it's like a physicalization of her grief, or her wonder. Like it's sort of grief without knowledge. She's not sure if her son is gone. And there's like a physical sort of gesture that's the trip itself. She has to go on this trip. She has to find out what happened. But she also has to sort of like celebrate her son in a way through this country. And I think that for her, the biggest revelation is like that the world is not all like what she knows. I think for a lot of people, when their children end up being different than they are, when their sexuality is different, when they make different career choices, when they marry someone of a different background, I think that so much of the anger, at least in my experience, has come from fear. You know, you're so afraid for your child. You're so afraid for what the world will do to them. And I think that for Paval, as she sort of tries to figure out why her son would have stayed, and if this would have been an okay place for him to live his life in a way that Calcutta, that India wouldn't have been, there is a kind of joy there for her, and at least knowing that this is a different, that he would have encountered a different attitude towards sexuality here. I don't think this character is going to be walking in a pride parade.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that Paval's journey is to sort of going from, I find this confusing and disgusting and painful, to I'm all in, legalized gay. But I do think that there's a bit of a sense of like, you know, sort of in a Lin-Manuel Miranda sentiment, like love is love. And you can, you know, love the person and love who they are and love that they found love, even if that love is difficult or foreign for you. Homosexuality is illegal in India. Proposition 337 or 377 declared. I mean, is a proposition that declares all homosexual acts illegal. And it's definitely something like, you know, as we talked about, India's been in a kind of a different place in its social development over the last half a century. And a lot of the movements that we've been sort of immersed in the West They are, and they're running at a different pace in India. So like the women's movement, civil rights movements. India has different sets. India has a totally different history. They have different civil rights movements around many different issues that like we don't have, like the abolition of caste and who is discriminated against in India and how you can make reparations for that wide-scale discrimination, and where India is at with feminism, where it's at with gender and sexuality. They're just in a different place. Which is not to say that like there isn't a growing sense of this, and there are pride parades in India, and there are gay activists and trans activists and people across the spectrum of gender and sexuality who are fighting for rights in India. But it's a big battle, and it's a big you're overturning a culture that has a lot of things that we would sort of see as kind of medieval. And I think that, you know, a lot of where this theme came from is my own in-laws and their response to homosexuality, which was not positive. And there are a lot of people in the United States who are anti everything. But sure. I didn't personally know any of them, including my own parents, including my own grandparents. So I think for me, that revelation and their freedom talking about sexuality in a very specific and sort of negative way, that also informed this novel and informed the character of Paval, because I never met people like that before, and I wanted to try to understand them from the inside out.
Gotcha. And it's a very powerful, and I don't want that part to be discounted in this story, because I mean, obviously diverse voices, diverse characters matter, and seeing this in this light, seeing it through this mother's eyes, and you know, it was very powerful, because for so much of the book, it was that man who took my son away from me. And yeah. She had that attitude. And I love the fact that we see Bim through other people's eyes. We don't see him from his perspective. We see it from his partner's perspective, or we see it through his mother's perspective. And I think that in and of itself was very powerful in the story, to be able to tell it. And you were able to do it so that he was a character, you know, I could get a sense of him between the two sides. But being able to tell that story in that way, you know, especially the importance of the parents coming to terms with it, because especially more for, so I think for the older generations, for the generations older than myself and Michele, you know, having the kids come out. I know in my family, it's my husband's side of the family. I've got a gay uncle on my husband's side, and then a gay aunt on my side. And for my husband's side, it was very difficult for that family, for his family to come to terms with it. They're very devoutly Catholic. So that was a big issue. And my family, though we were fairly Catholic, I wouldn't say we were devout Catholics, we're fairly Catholics. We were also of the mindset of, it was just, I remember, I think I was like 8 or 9, and my aunt had a best friend that she lived with, and that's who I knew growing up. And then I was like, I think it was 8 or 9, and my mom was like, oh yes, your Aunt Lorraine, she prefers girls, just like some girls prefer boys, she prefers girls. And that was it. Yeah. This is your aunt, this is the way she is, this is a part of life.
Yeah.
You deal with it. And it was like, okay, they're here, they're there, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the way it came through. And so seeing this through the mom's eyes of having to come to that acceptance, I think for those of us who aren't familiar with that, and having to talk and deal with people who aren't as okay with this, I think is an important thing.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. And look, honestly, you know, you marry somebody, get together with somebody, or you date somebody, or you make a friend, and you meet their family, and it personalizes all of these things, right? So like, especially when you do connect to somebody through marriage or a commitment ceremony or something that kind of links you have a kid with somebody, you are linked to their family in a way that is difficult to totally separate yourself from, especially if they're close to that family.
Yeah.
Which my husband definitely is with his family, and I'm with my family. And I think in some ways that, you know, there are these things that I sort of would have said, oh, like vocalizing this thing or feeling this thing makes you a bad person. like, saying this thing that I would consider to be racist or offensive makes you a bad person. And I had to sort of come to terms with the fact that, like, okay, like I might feel that way, but if I'm connected to this person, through marriage, through relationship, through family, they've become my family now, and they're open to me and they're accepting to me, which my in-laws really are. Then I have to find a way to think of them in a more complicated way. I don't agree with this. I don't agree with this thing that you feel, that you say. But I have to find a way to still understand you as a person. And I think, like, actually most people sort of know this because they don't have, like, they might not have, like, relatives who align so much with them, like, politically and socially. But I'm super privileged in that, like, my parents, my grandparents, and, like, all of us are just, like, really on the same page. And these things that happen, right? Like, people talk about going home to their crazy conservative grandparents and having to be like, no, I don't think that's okay. And I just never had that experience before. This was the first time.
And it's fascinating. It's great. Michele, do you have any other thoughts?
I'm just having fun listening. It's, there's, I really am bummed out I didn't get a chance to finish the book, because I know that as soon as I do, I'll be like messaging you on Instagram and hitting enter too early.
I like it. I do it too. I like it.
I had to message her to get her email address, and I wrote I wanted to write "we're getting," and I wrote "we're get," enter, send message. I'm like, wow, that's professional. But I know that I'll have like a dozen other questions. I really love books that bring another culture into a reader's life. Like, I had zero idea that there was that divide between Bengali and Bangladesh, and that it's, a big deal if you are in one of those cultures. I had no clue. So I really enjoy books that can teach me about that, because I think it's also, there's a big difference between seeing the tourist country, like, even if you go off and see local things, but you're only there for a fixed period of time, so you don't really get to fully immerse yourself in a culture the way you do when you live somewhere.
Yeah.
So books like this give you that opportunity to get a little bit deeper, I think.
Thank you. That's what I'm going for.
You met that goal.
Cool. You want a goal set? That's important. Lululemon bag will tell you that.
Which is really interesting, because the book isn't even set in India, but you brought the culture over with the characters.
Well, I think that's the other thing about, we're talking a little bit about, like, fish out of water feelings. I mean, I think that there's something about traveling that helps you see your own country really clearly. Mm-hmm. There's something about traveling that helps you see, like, you're in this sort of displacement state, and all those challenges and all that, sort of, like, it can bring up a lot of things that you're not really aware that you're holding on to. It can bring up some of the things that you didn't really know that were that important to you. I think that's also, like, the beauty of travel, is it really helps you see your home better. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of why it was important for me to have these people traveling together, so they could see the world through each other as they sort of, like, forge this unlikely friendship, like, to have them travel and, like, get to like each other, right? Like, get to sort of like and respect each other, because as much as I'd like to believe that, any exposure to anything new helps you, I think personalizing it is really how I think that we fall in love with things through people. Mm-hmm. I think that we are more open to thoughts, ideologies, identities, cultures through the people we meet. Mm-hmm. And they become that to us. They become the standard bearer, which is, right and wrong. I mean, no one person is their nation. But I have had so many experiences, often with Uber drivers, where an Uber driver will be like, an Uber driver in California, I was out in California recently, and he was like, he was from Afghanistan, talking about that. But he'd listed in this thing, he speaks Hindi. And I was like, oh, why'd you say Hindi? Like, don't you speak Pashtun? He was like, oh, I speak Hindi, I speak Pashtun, he speaks Urdu, he speaks everything. And he was like, people from India are all good people. And I was like, well, I mean,
There's a lot of people in India.
statistically unlikely. And he's like, people in Afghanistan are not good people. And I was like, well, you're a good person. Right? The people you meet become the country for you. I think it's dangerous, but it's also powerful.
Yeah, I have a lot of interesting conversations with Uber drivers too.
Every time I take an Uber.
Yeah. It was funny. There was one time where my husband was like, she kept talking to me, and she was practicing her English with me, and she was also talking politics.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and my husband is texting me because she's talking to me so much that she was missing exits.
No.
And my husband's texting me going, "Stop talking to her."
I know, but when people talk to me, I just talk to them.
Exactly, and like you said, it's you express it so well. It's how you learn about cultures and different perspectives is through people and interacting with people.
Absolutely. Like I always want to be the best version of myself when I travel because I'm so terrified of being like an ugly American. Like I'm so worried. Like I don't want to represent the brand badly. Not everybody feels this way.
Oh, and I've seen that. The Peru trip, there was we were in a market, my husband and I, and we don't like to barter that much.
No, it's not comfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so we tried it. We wear muted colors. We don't wear anything that's obviously American when we travel. And we're in this market in Peru. Yeah, exactly. And we're in this market in Peru, and there are these two women from Texas, which, mind you, outside of the United States, unless you're from Texas or you're from New York, they think you're Canadian. That's really what it comes down to.
Which is what we're all going for. We're like,
exactly.
All I want is to be mistaken for Canadian.
Oh, I swear to God, when we were in Fiji during the presidential elections, once they knew that we were American, even the Fijians, they jumped down our throats about it. And it got to the point where if somebody asked if we were Canadian, we would say yes, just because we didn't want to deal with it.
What you say, yes, eh?
Yeah, exactly. And then there was one time, I kid you not, we're in a group, and the guide was like, "Oh, are you all from New Zealand?" And my husband and I are in the back of the group just nodding. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Smiling on.
Kiwi, eh? Yeah. I know.
Yeah, and so, and in Peru, we're in this market, we're looking at stuff, and we're not that far from these people, and they were loud, they were obviously American, they had the bright clothes, and they were obnoxiously bartering. And my husband and I, without even having to say anything to each other, we just set down our stuff and went to the clear other side of the market. Because we're just like, you don't be that obnoxious American with your travel guys. I've said this before on the podcast, and I will say it again. Don't be a dick.
Exactly. Just be like a decent person.
Exactly.
I don't know. Look, it's all. I mean, people travel for all kinds of reasons. I've realized this over the years. We all want different things when we travel. I like, the nice thing about big countries, the nice thing about being in a country like India, as opposed to being in a European country, and I love Europe, but I think the tough thing for a lot of people from smaller countries to understand politically is like, when you're in a big country, they're just very well aware of the fact that like people aren't their government.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could have a government that you don't feel represented. Like you could feel very distant from your government, and like that's like a matter of course. If you go to like Russia or China or Brazil or Mexico or India, like people are just on your page. They're like, no, I get it. I get that you wouldn't. There's not that same sense of like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
But unrelated to that and related to being an ugly American, I was in Italy and I went to Cinque Terre. I was there with my husband, and he was like hanging out in one town. I took a little train to another town. And I was sitting on the train platform waiting for the next train. And there were a group of girls all in like athleisure, whatever. All must have been in their early 20s. All definitely saw Cinque Terre like on Pinterest. Definitely saw it on Pinterest. And they were like, "Oh my God, tonight we're getting margaritas." I was like, seriously?
Oh my God. Margaritas in Italy. Really?
Margaritas in Italy. There's so many good wine options. Whatever, it was fine. But I definitely like moved down the platform because I didn't want to be like associated.
It like rubs off a little bit if you get too close.
I was worried that if I was there any longer, I was going to be like, woo!
Exactly. Yeah,
No
like when I was in
rules.
France last time, my sister lives there right now, and she's adapted quite well. And we're walking through Paris, and all of a sudden there's like this bike parade going through the streets. And we're walking, and we're not thinking, bike parade, fine. And they make a left turn, and one of them gets into an argument with one of the drivers, one of the bicycle people, and we're walking, and my sister, we didn't even have to say anything. It was the three of us, my husband, my sister, and I. We just kind of look at each other, we're like, we're just going to go straight. We're not going to make that left turn yet. We'll just go straight.
I don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah, exactly. You avoid that stuff. And there's just something about traveling that just helps you open up. Like you said, you appreciate your own culture, and then there's a certain appreciation for being the outsider that you gain.
Well, and that's why I sort of picked this character who'd never traveled before as like one of the center points of this novel, because I've traveled for a long time. I've been so lucky. My parents took me traveling from an early age, and watching my in-laws and watching the way that they've grown through travel, even in the time that I've known them. My mother-in-law's done a lot more travel, and it's just so amazing the way the world has opened up to her.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wouldn't say that anybody, I definitely wouldn't say that these characters are like most people in my life. Like, they're really not. They are all sort of constructions. But those pieces, especially of my Indian relatives, they really made their way in, because it was like so amazing. It's been so amazing to watch that, and it was so amazing to watch it like the first time it happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love Satya. Poor Satya. I mean, he had to be this guide, and he knows nothing. And I think the funniest part was they were still in New York, and Pavel's like, "Oh, watchtower, what's that?" And he's like, "Oh, it's a watchtower, man." Yeah. And Rebecca's just like, "Oh my god," because it's not actually a watchtower; it's the Jehovah's Witnesses.
The Jehovah's Witnesses. There's not that many things that are like real in the novel, but the thing that happens on the circle line where the guide is like, never ever forget 9/11, and like at every point in the circle line was like, there's like the memorial is now 5 miles from us or whatever. That's a real thing that happened. It was like my third day with my in-laws, and they wanted to do the circle line. It was like literally I'd met them like 2 days earlier. They wanted to do the circle line. We got on, and the guy just wouldn't stop talking about 9/11. And my mother-in-law at one point was like, "Why does he keep talking about 9/11?" I didn't know that well, and I was like, "Well, it was an important event in America." She's like, "No, I know what 9/11 is. Why do you keep talking about it?" It gave me a nice insight into her incredibly dry humor, and I thought it was really funny. But yeah, all that circle line stuff is like some real stuff. Like, there's a lot of realness on the circle line.
I love it. It is a great book.
Thank you.
We are on our hour, I believe.
Yes, I think we are.
Yeah, we are. So guys, take the opportunity to pick it up. It is America for Beginners. If you are subscribed to our newsletter, we do have a direct link for you to purchase it. And you're going to want to purchase it because this is a great read for the summertime, especially road trips. Even though, as we said, the road trip is just a MacGuffin. It's about the journey within. It's still a good novel for summertime travel.
They cover a lot of ground.
They do. They really do. I mean, you get to see New Orleans, get to see Las Vegas, Philadelphia, yeah, and they get to LA and San Francisco.
Yeah.
I mean, I love it. It made me. I've got a road trip coming up this October, and it made me excited for my road trip. So.
Oh yeah. Hey, I'm all about a road trip.
Oh yes, road trips are the best.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Leah. We had so much fun chatting with you.
Great to talk to you guys. Thanks for having me.
So now you have to write another book. It doesn't have to be a sequel to this one, but it could be another book.
Okay.
Just have you come back on.
Absolutely. I'm excited. For this, not for the book, but for this.
Yes, for the wine and the talk.
I like the wine and the talking.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This has been a blast.
Thank you.
So much.
And everyone else, start reading the book of the month. And we'll be met next week, and we will be able to talk about it.
Yes, I promise you I will have at least a couple chapters read.
There you go. Big steps.
Good luck with your statistics paper.
Thank you. I'm not looking forward to that at all.
Look forward to the wine.
I will. Yes. Yeah.
Hold it in front of you like a horse with a carrot.
Yes, that's what I would do.
Right. And motivation.
There you go. We're
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.